With that, Mark Levine, host of the Inside Scoop, former Virginia delegate, with us now. You can't argue that Kamala Harris is popular with swing voters. She's not. She's deeply unpopular. Should Democrats be worried about what Nikki Haley just said, that the Republican nominee, whoever it is, can make this a referendum as much on Joe Biden as on 4 more years of Kamala Harris?
I think all vice presidents have trouble standing out. I think we'd have a hard time knowing what Mike Pence did, or frankly, a lot of people don't know what Joe Biden did when he was vice president, or Al Gore, or Dick Cheney, or certainly any of the others. But I think that she needs to tell what she's done. She needs to let people know that she was very tough on crime when she was California Attorney General, or the money she got back for homeowners over there. I mean, a lot of people don't know her story, and absolutely they should focus on it.
Didn't exactly work when she went to Iowa and New Hampshire as a presidential candidate.
She did not win the race.
She did not. No, she didn't even make it to Iowa or to the caucus. You think about her jobs that she's been invited: border czar, voting rights czar, abortion rights liaison, and the vaccine. You make the argument that she's underexposed in some way. People don't know who Kamala Harris is. Is that really the problem?
I think it is. Frankly, I think the president should give her more things to do. I think giving her the border was one of the toughest things.
Any of the things she's done.
I think she's been very good on abortion. I think she's given very strong speeches, and frankly, on that issue, the Democrats are going to run very hard in 24. I think on voting rights, she's made the issue. They don't have the votes for it. But no, do I think the president should give her more things to do? Absolutely, I do. I think, frankly, all presidents should give vice presidents more things.
Well, look, to be fair, when she went down to Tennessee after the 2 African-American members of the Tennessee State House were kicked out, she did a really good job.
Very good job.
That was a huge moment. Look, the fact of the matter, though, is she's fundamentally unpopular, and she's unpopular with swing voters. She's not unpopular with the base. Is there any discussion that you're hearing in Democratic circles about being willing to talk about replacing her, or is that now just the third rail?
None. There's no discussion. She's running for vice president. She said so. The president said so. I think people in the party very much like Kamala Harris. Although I'll tell you, there's some people that don't like her from the left. They think she was too tough on crime. They think
I've heard that. But really, in terms of talking to swing voters in Georgia, talking to suburban women in Pennsylvania, talking to swing voters in Michigan, in Ohio, what is Emily's List going to spend tens of millions of dollars telling them that they're suddenly going to go, gee, 60% of Americans have an unfavorable opinion on me, but I'm going to somehow peel off 10%.
Well, it's 55, as you showed, and I don't have connections to Emily's List to find out what they're doing. But I'll tell you what I would say. I would say she was tough on crime. She actually increased the conviction rate in California from about half of all criminal defendants to 2/3. Pretty good. I would talk about what she's done actually at the border. People don't talk about that, but she has a program to give billions of dollars to companies to help keep the migrants from coming to the border that hasn't been talked about very much. There's a lot that she can talk about.
All right. It's good to see you, as always. It has been too long.
It has.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn.
Good to see you, Mark. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.